I was there with a front row seat in my parents' house watching the TV all the way through from NFL Today through the 4 o'clock game when they were talking about Murder, She Wrote in 60 Minutes. Let's welcome in Rich Podolsky right now. He wrote the book, Madden Summerall, How They Revolutionized NFL Broadcasting. And I want to thank you for writing You Are Looking Live, which was one of my favorite. I listened to the books, Rich. I mean, it was like I was hanging on every second. And the fact that James Caan and Jimmy the Greek almost got into a fight before Super Bowl 10 at a hotel. I mean, you giving me insight like that is the best I could possibly ever ask for. So thank you.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. Since you guys are the Big 12 preview show, have you all decided who's going to win between Texas Tech and BYU this weekend?
I think it's going to be Texas Tech. Scotty, our producer here, says BYU. We'll have to check in with our other producer, Chris Visser, because we know he wields the big stick. But I will tell you right now, I think it's going to be Texas Tech. I think, Rich, they have horses and they've mastered this NIL game. And the fact that they played so well together early in the season, I think they're only going to get better and better and better. It's a pretty cool story.
As long as they can keep their quarterback healthy.
Yeah, that's been tough for them. It has been tough. This book is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. And nobody better to write it than you, somebody who was inside and in the trenches with these guys. Was there something specific that moved you to write this book? Was there a moment when you said, hey, I'm gonna write this Madden and Summerall book because people need to hear this?
After You Are Looking Live was so successful and CBS wound up doing a documentary by the same name based on the book, I was sitting around with one of the people that worked at both CBS and Fox, and we were talking about, all the people that we wrote about in the book and how the NFL Today got started. And she said to me that she wanted to write a Substack because she had a lot of good Madden and Summerall stories. And I said, well, I'd be glad to help you, but why don't you write a book instead of just a Substack? And she said, no, I can't write a book. And I thought about it and I said, well, I certainly could. And she said, I'd rather give the stories to you and you put them in your book. And I thought about it and I realized there were two people I needed to write this book. I really enjoyed going back into my days at CBS. So I had to get a hold of Van Gordon Sauter.
Oh, wow.
President of CBS Sports at that time in the early 80s. And he was 88 years old living in LA. I got a hold of him and I met him for lunch, flew out there from New York. And the other person was a guy named Terry O'Neill, who was a brilliant producer. And he was the one that Sauter hired to bring CBS into the 20th century as far as NFL production. O'Neill was the one who put together Summerall with Madden, except it was Sauter's idea to have Madden as the number one analyst, even though he was new to doing broadcasting and hadn't had a game go back to New York at that time.
Hey, do me a favor, Rich. Can you scooch over a little bit to your right? Does that chair have wheels? Oh,
Right?
There you go. Yeah, there you go. There we go. Perfect. We got to see that good-looking face of yours.
Yeah. Well.
So some of your writing and some of the stuff that you've brought to us, is very revealing. And I'd heard about Vin Scully and how close he was to getting that job. The Summerall job, which Summerall had actually had right before, and they did this test where they did Madden with 4 games with Scully and then 4 games with Summerall. Was there a moment there that the pick of Summerall was based on to call games with Madden, or was there a certain reason as to why?
The answer to your question is both of those. Scully liked to work alone, as he did in thousands of baseball games without an analyst. And he always had the amazing amount of research and he was a great storyteller. And that was Madden's whole deal. He was a storyteller. He liked to tell anecdotes about players. Madden wound up having this innate ability to rife out the way a player not just played, but his
the terminology he used, the way he could bring my mom into the game, right? Telling stories about a player. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, he had this great ability to tell you all about the different ways a player could affect a game, and also what he was like. So there was no room for Madden on the broadcast with Scully. Scully was doing all the storytelling, and he left no room for Madden. I went back and I looked at the YouTube, the whole game of the last two games that Scully and Madden worked together, and there was no Madden was almost like a robot. And it certainly wasn't the Madden we grew to love and know. But when he went to work with the 4 games with Summerall knew what the story was. He knew that he had to make room for Madden. And Summerall described himself as a minimalist. He copied Ray Scott, who he worked with in his early days at CBS Sports. And Summerall made it work. He gave up of himself, and he gave room for Madden to not only be Madden, but he gave him the time that he needed to. And Madden grew into it. And then once O'Neill gave him the CBS chalkboard so he could write on the screen and show you how play developed and why it happened, he always complained that TV only showed 4-on-4 football and not 11-on-11. And this was a way for him to do it. And he became America's football nutty professor.
How about how we got to this decision? I think it's super interesting. And for lack of a better word, the shenanigans, right, with Brookshire and Summerall together on the road. You've touched on the fact that they would arrive in a city to call a game together, and it was, popping bottles till they left to get on the plane to go back home. What went on there on the road? Is there any specific stories where a guy like Sauter is like, you know what, I think we've had enough of these guys together, and I think we need to make a change here because it's starting to affect the broadcast? They talk about that Super Bowl between the Rams and the Steelers, right, where Brookshire said, we weren't even prepared. We were at the pool all day long drinking.
Exactly. Boy, did you read the book or what? you got all the notes there, Pete.
Yeah.
It was a whole collection of them. I mentioned a couple of them in the book. One was when they were in a very famous bar in Manhattan, in one of the great hotels, and they were in the room where it was supposed to be polite gentlemen and ladies later at night having cocktails, and Brookshire, who had already had one too many, noticed that the piano player had a toupee. And before Summerall could stop him, Brookshire flew over the piano, grabbed the toupee, and came back to him like a hunting dog with the toupee. And Summerall had to make a deal with the manager that they would never, ever come back, so he wouldn't call the cops on him.
That sounds like the scene in the Blues Brothers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Brookshire, he was a fun guy to hang out with, and he was a great guy. But, nobody had the nerve to ever tell him he had gone too far or had too much to drink. And on the other hand, Summerall never showed that he was drinking too much because he could always hold his liquor. And you never, ever knew if Summerall had 2 drinks or 20. He just was amazing that way. And, eventually it got to him. And in 93, Brookshire led an intervention that saved his life for another 18 years.
Yeah, you talk about that. And since we're here, I'd love to touch on that now. For me, I find it so interesting because I'm 14 years sober. And I can remember hearing when I remember when Madden or when Summerall would go to Betty Ford, there was a couple times where he would be absent and Vern Lundquist would be filling in for him. And I read Vern's book, and Vern would actually get a little pissed that, it was basically Pat's drinking really kind of affected Vern's emotional roller coaster, right? And you forget about that, the other people you affect, because Vern is told, I'm going to do the rest of these games. And then Pat would come right back in. Can you talk to us a little bit about before Pat crashed out and got help, what that was like for John Madden and the people around that environment that led to that intervention?
Well, everybody knew that Pat was drinking, including John. John had a rule when he went from the plane to the train and then to the bus, that nobody could be drinking on the bus. And Pat had a way to hide his drinks. At one time, they were actually shooting a little scene for a halftime or a pregame on the bus, and it was like 10 in the morning, and Pat had a little can of Sprite in his hand, and one of the associate producers said, "Oh, let me get that out of the picture and out of the shot." And Pat said, whoa, don't do anything with that can. And he said, I'm going to just put it off to the side here. It won't be in the shot. And pretty much everybody knew it wasn't just Sprite in that can, that he always had some vodka in there too. And, on game day, one of the producers mentioned he always had a Solo cup, a red Solo cup, a to-go cup that had both, ginger ale or Sprite or something like that, and vodka. And, you could never tell. Pat really held it, and, it almost killed him in the early 90s. And eventually it did kill him because it just wrecked his body, even though he made it through Betty Ford and never had another drink after 93.
It's an amazing story, and you do such a great job breaking it all down. Madden and Summerall, the book is out now. Rich, what about the magical moments those two created together? Was there a particular time? Because I know you write that Madden struggled for the first couple of years, but Pat really worked with him and worked to make him better. But was there a moment when, whether it's the folks on Madison Avenue or the folks in Black Rock for CBS are like, wow, these guys are hot. We love this. They have turned the corner, and now they're a part of, the fabric of America, not just sports television.
Well, Madden always had it in him because it showed right away when he started doing the Miller Lite commercials, which is the reason Gordon Sauter wanted him to be the number one analyst. He started doing the Miller Lite commercials in the fall of 1980, which was his second year at CBS. As I said, he did 4 games the first year and 6 games the second year, and none of those games went back to New York. So when Terry O'Neill got to CBS in 81 and he met with for lunch with Sauter, he said, why do you want Madden? Have you seen any of his games? Because they haven't gone back to New York. And he said, no. How come he's the guy? He said, he's the guy. Finally, he admitted it was 30 seconds at a time in the Miller Lite commercials of Madden breaking through the wall and sidling up to the bartender and saying tastes great or less filling or whatever it was. He was the kind of guy that everybody could identify with. He wasn't going to talk down to you. And that's the way he was in the booth. It was none of this coach speak that so many of these analysts have. I don't want to mention any names, but they all think they're getting paid by the word. And, what Madden had total respect for Summerall, where he had very little respect for TV guys before he accepted the job. He called them all a bunch of hairdos, and he hated Howard Cosell. But Madden was almost self-taught because nobody at CBS really helped him until he got on the air with Summerall, and Summerall knew what Madden was all about and what he could become. They both were Renaissance guys. Summerall was a great athlete, and the first broadcaster to go from the field to the booth, to then 12 years later to the play-by-play side. And he did that. He was the number one play-by-play guy at CBS for almost 7 years before the stories about the drinking with Brookshire got back to New York, and he got pulled off the job. And he was not happy when he had to fight for his job in '81. And he, for the first time in 20 years with CBS Sports, he got an agent. And then also he floated a story that made the AP and the New York Times that he was going to run for Senate in the state of Florida on the Republican ticket. And as you know, probably today, his daughter is an executive in the White House under President Trump. Her name is Susie Wiles. It stayed in the family that way, but he wound up getting the job and staying with CBS. And he and Madden, right from the beginning, Madden felt comfortable with him. He could tell his stories. And when he went out on a limb too far, Summerall had a great way of pulling him back by just saying a word or two. And they were just great together. They played off each other, kind of like Abbott and Costello.
Yeah. And there was such a mutual respect there, right? I think that allowed them to work together. My theory is, and you probably have more on this in the book, and people can check it out, is that Madden probably really respected Summerall as an athlete and someone who had done it before. And so I'm sure the two of them really jived that way. Was there someone you talked to? You know, this is 50 years ago, this whole thing started. So I would imagine it's a little tougher to traverse, America and find some of these players and characters in the story. But was there someone you talked to that told you a surprising story? Someone you didn't think was going to be able to give you that much, and you were like, "Wow, that's a pretty good one. This is going in the book."
A few of the guys that worked with him, when Terry O'Neill started in '81, he hired 9 assistants straight out of college. They called them broadcast associates. He followed a path that Roone Arledge started when Terry was at ABC as producer of Monday Night Football. And among these 9, one was a guy named Mike Arnold, who today is CBS Sports #1 director, has directed 7 Super Bowls. And another was Richie Zients, who is Fox's #1 producer, and he's produced 8 Super Bowls. And these guys told me stories about working with Madden. And the story that I will never forget and didn't know was, you always talk about, Summerall and Brookshire did everything together, hung together, drank together. When the game was over, Madden and Summerall went their own ways. Summerall liked to hang out with the owners of the other teams and the management and go to steak dinners and have his martinis, while Madden preferred to hang out with these kids and the crew. And one time they check into the hotel in Washington, D.C. for a game that weekend, and there's a note waiting for Madden. It's from Ethel Kennedy, the widow of RFK, who was the brother, of course, of the president. And the note says, "John, we are the Kennedy family here. We are huge fans of yours. We'd love to have lunch or dinner with you this weekend if you could fit us in." And little Mike Arnold looks up at John and says, "Geez, John, are you going to have dinner with Ethel Kennedy?" Who was quite famous in Washington at that time. And John looks at him and finally says, "Nah, I'm going to have Mexican food with you guys." That's who John was. Another story I heard from his son, Pat Summerall's son, was what a great athlete Pat was. Now, we all kind of knew he was great in basketball and football. In fact, he turned down a basketball scholarship from the great Adolph Rupp at Kentucky, who had won several national championships by then, because Rupp wouldn't let him play football too. So his son relayed to me that Pat had an ability to play 5 different sports that he lettered in high school, and one of them was tennis. Now, imagine Pat Summerall being a great tennis player. He taught himself how to play tennis starting at age 10 in the local playgrounds and schoolyards. His school didn't have a tennis team. He never had a coach, but they entered him in a tennis tournament in northern Florida. He swept through everybody and won it. And he decided he wanted to find out how good he was. There were every year in February, there was this great tennis tournament in Fort Lauderdale with all the rich kid tennis players down in South Florida. And he hitchhiked 320 miles with his one pair of high top black sneakers and his rickety old racket under his arm. And he won that tournament, the junior tournament. When he was 16, he beat an 18-year-old who wound up playing for in Forest Hills for the national championship 4 years later. So Pat was one hell of an athlete, and probably, if there was any money in tennis, would have gone that way instead. But he wound up playing in 1952 with the Detroit Lions and the great quarterback Bobby Lane. He was an end and a defensive end on that team, and they won a championship that year. Unfortunately, Pat broke his arm in several places and was silly enough to tell the coach that even though his arm was healed the next year, he still couldn't reach out far enough to catch all Bobby Lane's passes like he could the year before. 2 weeks later, he was traded to the worst team in the league, the Chicago Cardinals. And he spent
how did he get, you talk about him as an athlete,
to the Giants.
Yeah, and then he goes to the Giants and he becomes a tremendous kicker, right?
And he became a folk hero, yeah. He had a famous 50-yard field goal in 1958 in the wind and the snow at Giant Stadium. I think it was Yankee Stadium in those days. And it helped them make the playoff. That was against the Baltimore Colts and Johnny Unitas, and it was known as the greatest game ever played. And the 50-yard field goal was a decision of the coach that his assistant coach, Vince Lombardi, was against going for the field goal. It was near the end of the game. It was about a minute to go. He wanted to go for a first down to get closer, but it was 4th and like 3, and they went for it. And Summerall winds up in the huddle, and his quarterback says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "They sent me out to kick a field goal." He says, no kidding. Are you kidding? All right. And he kicks it, and it goes through, and he becomes a folk hero in New York. And he became known as the kicker ever after.
And what did Lombardi say to him when he came to the sideline?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. So when he gets back to the sideline after making the field goal, everybody's patting him on the back and jumping on him. And he sees Lombardi. He figures Lombardi's going to do the same. Lombardi grabs him and shakes him and says, "You son of a bitch, you know you can't kick it that far."
That's the best. How about Summerall's broadcasting chops? How did he develop those? I mean, I would imagine a guy like that's just naturally confident. You're talking about all of his esteemable acts, right? Being an amazing athlete. But how did he become such a great broadcaster?
He gave all the credit to his grandmother, who raised him in northern Florida, from sitting on the front porch reading books together. And he got a call one day, and the CBS producer was looking for Charlie Connolly, the quarterback of the Giants, for an audition for a weekend sports show on CBS radio. And Connolly wasn't there, and Summerall said, "I'll give him the message." And the guy said before he hung up, he said, "Well, what are you doing? You sound like you have a pretty good voice." He said, "Well, not much." He said, "Well, why don't you come too?" And he came, and he wound up winning the audition, getting the job. That led to a much bigger job on CBS radio, where they eventually made him a morning time drive talk show host when he was doing weather and sports and doing all sorts of interviews, telling stories, interviewing celebrities. Summerall first turned down the job. He said, "I can't do all that," but they sent him out to LA to work with a broadcaster by the name of Wink Martindale, who many of you probably know from Game Shows. And Wink was a DJ in those days, and he taught him how to do it. Sent him back to New York. He did the job. He was making a lot of money for 1962. He was making something like $500,000 a year because he was reading the commercials also, and he got paid for those. But by the end of the year, the sweet payday ended when CBS decided to go to all news all the time. And Summerall figured, I better find a job. He went to CBS Television, the sports department, and asked if he could work for them. And he wound up being the analyst on Giants games back in 1962 when CBS was doing 2 sets of announcers for each game, one for the home team and one for the visitors. Can you imagine that?
That's amazing. I heard you mention that on Mad Dog Russo. I thought that was just absolutely amazing. You talk about these two men. Did they understand that they were revolutionizing broadcasting? Was there a moment, because they really became a part of your family, it felt like? The most important day of the week when everybody's together, Sunday afternoon, these guys were there too. Did they understand that?
I don't know if they understood it, but I know that they felt the freedom to do what they wanted to do. And Madden came up with these ideas of getting to the game early and going and visiting the coaches and finding out strategy. And O'Neill was all in on that and went to Val Pinchback of the NFL and asked for permission for the whole crew to interview coaches and players 2 days before the games. Never had been done before.
Whoa. So you're telling me when I go to because I call games now, like we get the access to these college coaches, like, on a Friday or a Thursday. You're telling me that John Madden started that? Wow.
Madden started that. What happened before that was the Madden and the Summerall, the play-by-play guy and the analyst would go with the producer and the director. They'd get there on Friday. They'd meet with the PR guy from each team at a certain restaurant or a bar. The PR guys would give them the injured players, the 3-deep roster, and also tell them how to pronounce the tough names. And after that, it was just storytelling for an hour, and then everybody went their own way. And that's the way it was every weekend. Nobody interviewed players or coaches, and it was totally Madden taking the train, getting there early, and doing it on his own, and then CBS coming along for the ride. And both Madden and Terry O'Neill would lecture the crew and the camera guys Saturday night in Terry O'Neill's suite at the hotel, and they would stay in. It would be a teach-in with Madden going over the plays to expect. If you had a test and you knew all the questions ahead of time, you would do well on that test too. And that's why CBS's production became the best. After that, they knew exactly what was coming.
Now, you were a part of the team at CBS during this time, mostly on the NFL Today, if I'm correct.
I was a writer in the studio, and I did public relations and publicity work during the week. And that's why I got to know Dick Ebersol at NBC. There was a year or two when he was producing Saturday Night Live, and he gave me a call and said, what do you think of the idea of having John Madden as the host of Saturday Night Live after the Super Bowl? Because we could send a producer on the train with him. Ebersol knew he was taking the train by then. And I talked Madden into it, and Madden loved the idea, and he was a little worried about it. But I said, don't worry, they'll never embarrass you on that show, and they'll just be a lot of fun. And it was a great night for him, and it was a great ride back to New York. They got stuck in a snowstorm in Buffalo, and Madden knew a guy who lived up there and came and picked them up, took them to the train station down in Buffalo, and they hung out at a bar for an hour or two. When they got to the bar, it was totally empty. And within 15 minutes, it was full because word got out John Madden was there.
Couple more for you, Rich. This is great stuff for me. Was there a particular Super Bowl that those two guys really felt like, or you felt like, was their best? Because they called a lot of Super Bowls together. Was there one that they really felt like? You always hear Al Michaels and Summerall or Madden's last game, that Steelers-Cardinals one, was like the perfect game, Al Michaels says. But was there one for Summerall and Madden?
Yeah, that's really hard for me to to pick, I think they did a great job in the first one, considering it was the first one, and the game, their pregame started with Summerall sitting on Madden's earphones by accident, and they had to figure out a way to get him to.
And this is the game at the Silverdome, right?
At the Silverdome, yeah. I remember
Yeah.
going there. It was an icy, snowy, horrible day, and the writer from the New York Daily News complained he had to walk too far from the bus to get inside the stadium, and he fell 3 times on the ice.
And that was the Bengals and the 49ers. And that was a huge broadcast for them. Just a couple more before I let you go. As they rolled off into the sunset, Summerall's health started to fail, right? What were those last couple years like for the two of them together? As maybe John started to see, along with the production team, that maybe Pat was failing a little bit, but Pat didn't want to give up the reins. He loved what he was doing.
Yeah, he didn't, and he didn't realize he had a brain disease that was caused really by the alcoholism and how it wrecked his body, and it wound up killing him a few years later. But they saw a drop off in Pat's performance right around 99, 2000. And they came to him, the executives at Fox, David Hill and Ed Gorin, and they said, Pat, you're doing the Super Bowl with John in January or February of 2002. We want that to be your last broadcast. It'll mark 50 years in the business for you. We'd like to send you out with a soft landing. And Pat finally agreed to it, and they called a press conference. And at the press conference, he realized he didn't know what he would do without it. So he said, well, I'm not going to quit. I'm not giving it up. And it really made headlines all across the country. Not so fast, Pat said. And Madden was aware of the slippage because David Hill, the top executive at Fox Sports, kept him updated on almost a daily basis of what he was talking to Pat about and what their intentions were. And I think John just tried to help make things as easy as possible for Pat, just like Pat made it easy as possible for John when John was a nervous wreck on their first broadcast together. So,
Rich, this is such good stuff. I could keep you here forever. Madden and Summerall, that is the book. It's out now. Get it wherever you get your books, How They Revolutionized NFL Broadcasting. I thank you so much for the delightful read that the NFL Today was. You Are Looking Live. I encourage people to grab that too if they haven't read it. And I can't wait to dig into Madden and Summerall. And I really do appreciate you sharing all this stuff for us, because when I was a kid, Rich, I would come home from church and I would put out the Philadelphia Inquirer and I would watch your show, the NFL Today. And that was my first flirtation with addiction. Dunkin' Donuts, the football spreads, the NFL Today, into the college football or the NFL football day. Just amazing times, dude.
Where did you live in Philly?
So I grew up in Bryn Mawr, right outside, right by Villanova University. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on the other side, Northeast Philly.
Let's go. Where'd you go to high school?
Northeast High.
All right. I went to Archbishop Carroll. That's cool, man.
Yeah, I played varsity basketball, and they had an old-time coach named Ike Woolley. And at halftime, he'd give us the speeches every time we were in a close game, when he had the great Guy Rogers.
Rogers, yeah.
The great guard who played for Temple University and then the 76ers, how he beat Will Chamberlain in Overbrook High with Guy Rogers.
It's amazing. All the talent, by the way, and you talk about this in the NFL Today book, that came out of that Philadelphia area. The guys working at WCAU radio,
right,
that really kind of matriculated up to New York and changed history.
Yeah, and in that NFL Today book, I had a lot of fun at a guy named Jack Dolph's expense because of the bookies waiting every Monday in the CBS lobby because he was not good at making his bets, but he was a genius at programming. and he came from WCAU in Philly.
Great stuff, Rich. I hope you sell 1 million books, like my man Mad Dog said. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank Chris for me.
You got it. I will.
Take care.
Got it. Thanks so much, Rich. And there you go. Chris Visser gets the thank you from Rich Podolsky, and we get over 30 minutes of absolute compelling info and intel for this guy right here, and I hope for you. I cannot wait to tackle this book. We'll step aside. Scotty's got a great story for us about why sports really are as special as they are, and then we'll get on with it. Let everybody get on with their day on this Wednesday. The Pete Souza Show, presented by Slovakic.